While we're on the OTA train, let's get into a surprise standout for the New York Jets, Quantez Stiggers, who was a day 3 pick. We've talked about his story a ton because it was very interesting. Never played college football. He played in the fan-controlled league and then the CFL last year. But he's really stood out over OTAs. And again, like we could pump the brakes on it. Like, let's see it in training camp and preseason games and eventually in the regular season. But still, for someone who's, a day 3 pick to be that noticeable is a really good sign. He was going up against Alan Lazard in coverage and dominating him. And then I think their last practice was on Thursday or Friday of last week. He had a pick 6 off of Tyrod Taylor. So he's really stood out in a positive light, and I think some Jet fans are excited about his potential future with the team.
Yeah, and listen, anytime you can get value from those late round guys, you've got to be excited, right? And anytime you can extract value from a player drafted really outside of round 3, once you get into day 3 territory and those players start making plays in OTAs and solidifying their spot on the roster, that's exciting stuff. And for this Jets team that is relying on a few wide receivers who've had some problems with health, this is important. I mean, Mike Williams in the lineup, yeah, we expect him to elevate the ceiling of this offense and be a phenomenal target for Aaron Rodgers based on playing style alone. We think Mike Williams, perfect match for what Aaron Rodgers likes to do as a passer. But Mike Williams, often injured throughout his career, coming off of a season-ending injury, you got to have some depth behind him. So Stiggers stepping up during OTAs, making some plays, gives you excitement and gets you a feeling that there is enough depth here where if this guy continues to develop, plays well in the training camp and then preseason, regular season, it all will compound, and maybe he could end up playing a role long-term and at the very least this year being a reliable depth piece for some of our often injured wide receivers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for Quantez Stiggers here, I think a lot of fans, what they see is someone who could be a DJ Reed replacement. And of course, as I say that, Peter comments, of course, if Stiggers develops, then maybe JD envisions him as the DJ Reed replacement for 2025. So on the same page there, because a lot of people look at DJ Reed's contract and they think, okay, he's a free agent at the end of this year. You probably have to make a decision on whether you are extending Reed as an outside corner or Michael Carter, your slot corner. I think it's going to be tough to extend both those guys. So if you have a strong season, in a reserve role for a guy like Quantez Stiggers, maybe they feel comfortable letting DJ Reed walk and paying Michael Carter in the slot, who's younger. And also, let's be honest, slot corners don't make nearly as much money as someone who's, I don't know, probably a top 20 outside corner in the NFL would make. So I think this could be like best case scenario. I'm not ready to say after, one strong OTAs that, he's going to be the guy post DJ Reed, but I think ultimately like that would be their ultimate goal here if he was to reach that level.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're hoping for. And I also realized I misplaced who Quantez Stiggers was in my head and talked about the wide receiver position. So circling to the slot cornerback position, you're right though in the sense that that's a position that becomes more and more valuable year to year. And I think that finding talent there is becoming more difficult because of the way that NFL teams evaluate outside cornerback versus slot cornerback. And some teams don't prioritize the nickel cornerback role the way that other teams do. I know the Giants are kind of one of those teams. They haven't really solidified that as like a true starting position. So they've had a lot of late round picks and reserve guys rotating in and out of that slot cornerback role. But the Jets completely different. They've got a slot corner and they've got a guy who maybe eventually can develop into that role or to the outside, depending on how you view the situation here for the Jets. But the way that they have been developing cornerback talent over the last several years is a major strength. That's Robert Saleh right there. Like we've talked a lot about my potential disbelief in this coaching staff and my concerns with it, especially on the offensive end with Nathaniel Hackett. Peter has the same concerns as he mentioned in the comments recently. Hackett is the one that gives us all nightmares. But I do have my question marks about Robert Saleh. But the one thing you can't question with him, his ability to develop young defensive talent. So if you want to have confidence in that secondary as a whole or in Stiggers' ability to move forward and become a starter one day, I think that, Saleh's around at least for the now, and that gives him a really good fighting chance of developing into a quality starter.
Exactly. If anything or if anywhere deserves the benefit of the doubt, it's Robert Saleh on his New York Jets defense and just how well they've developed talent on that side, both him and Ulbrich, and even just the positional coaches like White Cotton on the defensive line. The Jets corner coach has done a really good job developing talent. So again, if for whatever reason they're in a spot where they have to let DJ Reed walk, it would stink because Reed's a good player. Yeah, I think he's a very good running mate for Sauce Gardner, but in a salary capped sport, sometimes you have to make those tough decisions. And I would trust them more on the defensive side of the ball. I think anyone would, with having to lose an already established veteran and finding a cheaper, younger replacement through the NFL draft. If we're looking instead at, again, like a similar situation, right? Like both your tackles are free agents after this year. If the Jets are hoping that Carter Warren, who they drafted last year in the 4th round, can just eventually plug right in and start at right tackle, maybe that's the case, but I have a hell of a lot more faith in the defensive side of the ball and the defensive guy being able to be the answer than I do with someone on the offensive side of the ball.
And I agree with that as well. And I've been so impressed with the way that the Jets have developed young talent over recent years. Obviously, we could question the Will McDonald pick and, what his ceiling and what his future is going to look like. But even Jermaine Johnson, as an example, young guy who they got to step in and produce rather quickly and develop very quickly into a quality starter. And that's been happening across the board for the New York Jets. So anytime they find some talent in the late rounds that Robert Saleh is really keen on, I think that you have to have some faith and confidence in it. So that's why I think with Stiggers, of course, an unorthodox approach here. His path to the NFL is one of the more interesting ones that we've seen in recent years. Canadian Football League over to the NFL. But at the same point, or to that point at least, he was playing against technically professionals, guys outside of college football. He's faced stronger competition in a roundabout way and might be more prepared to make that leap into the NFL than some of these younger rookies who were drafted in the later rounds. So having that experience going up against somebody just older and more experienced in the sport of football, he's had that experience before. And I think that is something that's really important and could be playing a role in his quick development at OTAs. And maybe that does give you cause for concern. Maybe this could be fool's gold, right? This is just an aspect of some of these young guys step into OTAs and they don't look that impressive because they've never faced off against a 30-year-old receiver who's been in the NFL for almost 10 years, right? Those rookies have never seen that. But with Stiggers playing in the Canadian Football League, there are veteran players there. There's former NFL players who go over to the Canadian Football League. So that aspect might be giving him less of a learning curve going into the NFL and making his transition a little bit easier, which is causing him to play better early in OTAs. Will that hold over into training camp, preseason, regular season? That remains to be seen, but it is giving him an edge right now, I would assume. And I do think that there is reason to be excited about what he could do throughout the rest of the summer heading into the regular season.
Yeah, Johnny Boy agrees with us too. He says, I've said it before, I trust coaching staff on that side of the ball. Our defense will be special. I think that's the hope. And if you have good depth at even positions that are strength, for instance, corner, like the Jets trio of starting corners, if you include the slot position, I think is, about as good as any team in the league. And, just adding more depth behind that, I think is going to be a plus there. But yeah, it's tough to gauge on these younger players. I like the point you bring up about Stiggers going up against CFL competition and older guys who maybe have a little bit more experience versus, collegiate players. It's going to be interesting to see if that success continues into training camp and beyond, because, as excited as I am about him, I mean, we've seen it before, guys who've had a strong couple days of practice in OTAs and then we never hear from them again. It's just, that's the reality of it sometimes.
Yeah, but I do believe that with Stiggers having that experience in the Canadian Football League, that is going to provide him with the experience necessary to not make this just OTA highlights and done. I think that his kind of forte here is the fact that he has faced strong competition in the past. It's not just the young 18-year-olds that he was beating up on. He was facing 25-year-old players, 30-year-old players. So I think that helps him right now in OTAs, and I think that's going to help him as he goes forward throughout the summer. And I think there's plenty of reason to believe in him. Like we mentioned, Robert Saleh, the defensive coaching staff's ability to develop talent on that side of the ball, but plus One, you consider that he played in the Canadian Football League against a little bit tougher competition in some aspects. And I don't want to say tougher in the sense that the CFL is more talented than the SEC or anything like that. That's not necessarily the case, but it's just the fact that he's faced more experience and veteran players, I think is probably paying off for him right now in OTAs, maybe building his confidence so he can continue a strong summer of performances and not just be an OTA highlight reel that then fizzles out. I think that you can definitely see a path for Stiggers to continue his development and be a quality contributor for this Jets team.